of our schools, our neighborhood schools in Northeast Portland are on the list of priority and focus schools. So I think I haven't heard from anybody from Northeast Portland yet, but I have an interesting perspective because I have 2 children at one of those schools, at Rigler School. And I wrote a question, and it was long, and I'm going to try and sort of shorten it. One thing is that I would like to see all of our students pass, say for example, 3rd grade reading benchmark. So one of my questions was, some people have said, well, the test is no good if everybody passes the test. So for you, what is your goal for an achievement level? What would you be satisfied with in terms of people passing this test, whatever test you want to make, whatever curriculum, Common Core curriculum, however you want to assess it? There's a lot of discussion. Okay, we get some in the 40s, we get in the 30s, we get in the 50s. That's unacceptable to me. I would like all of those students to be able to read, at least. And so, what's an acceptable metric for you for meeting benchmark? Just take 3rd grade reading. And specifically, could you give me like 3 specific things that you can change or you would have the superintendent change to raise achievement and reduce the achievement gap? Because it's a crisis. Everybody's got their own crisis, but I think you and I share that as a crisis. And it's not fair, and it's not good for anybody. And I don't know what the solution is, and I'm hoping that you can come up with some really concrete, specific ideas for me.
First of all, thank you very much for your comment. I really I can feel this means a great deal to me, and I appreciate that. Secondly, to the extent that I'm not able to answer the whole thing tonight, I'd be happy to give you, let's get together. I'll say that the wrong way, but let's talk a little later at some point, however you say that. It's an important issue and a complex one, but my answer to you would be that we have the ability, anytime we choose, to intervene in the conditions that make for low performance in children. We know how to do that. It happens all the time, regardless of whether children are wealthy or from less than wealthy homes and so on and so forth. What we haven't done in ample supply is to create those conditions in every single community and in every single school. So when I said 2 minutes ago about it, it's about creating those conditions so that everybody gets a chance to enjoy the kind of resource that you see up here in the form of these parents and teachers. Secondly, I would say the things that I would see us doing better, if you will, I think that you asked me about a metric. Right now, our 3rd grades are essentially right at around, in terms of proficiency, our 3rd grade proficiency rate is something in the mid 60, low 70s. Right? And then when you look at the data by a whole section, a cross-section of who is attending schools in the state of Oregon, you see that there is this enormous gap, and it's an unforgivable tragedy. And that gap is that we don't have many children, particularly children of color, poor children regardless of what color they are, but they're poor, and they live in various communities, rural and so forth around this state, and that gap is enormous and getting bigger all the time. So when the legislature apportions money, House Ways and Means apportions money to public education, in some ways, and I've said this when I was in New York, you are funding dysfunctionality. And what I'm suggesting to you is to take a bite out of that dysfunctionality. We have to set some benchmarks that we can achieve. So for example, even if our third grade proficiency level is 70%, I think it ought to be higher than that in this state. We ought to be looking at least a 10% growth in the proficiency rates of our third graders. virtually in the next 2 years. So that would be one metric. Grow it by 10% and reduce the gap by 15. The gap right now for, depending upon who we're talking about, is somewhere between 30 and 40%.
How are you going to do it?
What are you going to get to my school? What is somebody going to do for my school to do that?
So
They can fire all the
It's not
teachers.
my, and it's not my kids, quite frankly. My kid is in the TAC program. It's all of her peers.
right.
One of the things I think you bring up a great point, and I think that when we're looking at reading and that we want all of our kids to know how to read, that I go back to what Representative Tomei said about healthcare and babies. And I mean, one of the things that determines success of students has to do with their birth weight. So it's long before they even come to school. And knowing these things, that we know that there are problems, but what you're saying is, what's the intervention?
We don't have
Which-
assistance for intervention because we don't have the funding.
We don't have the funding for intervention. I think there.
That is not true. That is not true. That is not true. Wait.
Hold on for a second. I think that it's the intervention rather than the test. I mean, we know when we read with kids if they can read or if they can't. And so I think the money that you would be putting towards that could go to the intervention.
Yes.
Of course, there's not enough money, but even, I mean, I have to say that I know that my daughter, who's a 3rd grader, can read. I don't know how she's going to do on that test, so I'm pulling her out of it because I don't want her to feel like I'm not playing games here. I think it's really, it's the measurement that you use. We want all of our kids to be able to read. It is a lifelong skill, but we don't, I mean, it does, we need the intervention, and with intervention there's professional development and more people to help with that.
Could we hear Dr.
We have a